You did great, by the way.
Thank you. That's very sweet. Great topics. Hi, everyone. Thank you for staying on. I'm back, and I have Christine Song with me. And we're going to be talking about something I find this so interesting. It's the unconscious biases we have about women leaders and its thoughts from an HR perspective. Christine, I'm going to talk a little bit about you so we know who we're speaking to here. So Christine Song has worked in HR for almost 20 years. She has experience working in large corporate environments as well as tech startup companies that are looking to scale. She's the founder of Topscale HR, a consulting firm focused on creating people programs for scaling startups. Most recently, she joined ChefHero as their chief people officer. And I can also add this, that you are a prolific speaker, because that is how we met. I think this is my third time interviewing you on stage or at a forum. So anyways, we're going to meet again, obviously.
For sure.
Pleasure to do this again. So, it's interesting. I look at the title of this forum, and it has a woman leader in it. You are this very thing in this title. You're a woman leader. What has your own experience been so far with unconscious bias in the workplace?
Yeah, when I had originally asked Saide to be part of this conversation, I thought it would be really interesting because she is a finance leader. She's worked at tech startups, CFO, and she's female. And typically in finance and CFOs, you see male leaders in those roles. And obviously, from my perspective, I'm at the head of HR. I've been doing it for a while now. And it seems pretty typical to see women as head of HR or a very large HR department. And so from my experience, I had gone to a speaking engagement at Mars once, and they were talking about diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and some of the unconscious biases we have. And why is it that marketing and HR always has a larger group of women teams, women leaders within an organization, and how it creates more harm when you have departments and divisions that are led by one, gender over the other. And so I thought this would be a really interesting topic because here we are at Disrupt HR, and there's a lot of people signed up. I think that in the industry, we've seen it very pervasive, favorably towards women, but not necessarily for the right reasons. And I'll share a little bit about that as we get into the talk, because I think this is really interesting. I've thought about it for a while.
Interesting. And well, then we may as well get into it, right? HR, as you said, is typically a role filled with more women than men. Why is that?
So I personally think it's a lot of the unconscious biases or the biases just blatant as it is. I think a lot of people in the past have seen this very old framework of what HR entails. It's, it's events. You're the social committee. You're the cheerleader. You need to get the catering and the cupcakes, we got to keep our employees happy. And it created this culture, this myth of HR being better for women groups, women leaders, because they're so good at admin. They're good at, coordinating and taking care of those little details that, men don't often do so well in. And it became very pervasive that it's a woman's type of role. I've even in my career, had to hire heads of HR for organizations. And when I talk to, let's say, the CEO or a founder, I would say, so, what are you looking for in a head of HR? And they're like, well, to be quite honest with you, I prefer that they're female. And then they'll go on and list some of the things that, that they'll be responsible for. And I always stop them and say, why do they have to be female? Like, well, what made you kind of turn to gender? And they would always say, well, yeah, I just think women have more empathy. They develop relationships better with people. And so it's that old mentality of HR being a guidance counselor, a psychiatrist, the office mom that's going to take care of everything, the one who's going to take care of all the catering for those events. And I just think that it does the role of real injustice, because all of us who work in HR and understand the kinds of things that we're working on right now, look at this whole COVID situation. HR has been at the front line for every organization out there dealing with issues in, health and safety and the whole pandemic and privacy issues. And I think that it's way more than what we consciously think HR is about. So when you kind of label a role for women or label a role for men, I think that does a lot of great harm.
it's interesting because I would also imagine that if you think that empathy and nurturing is the role of HR, in a way you excuse other roles from having to do that. And really, though, I mean, in these times, that's the role of everyone in your organization. That should be the role, part of the role of your CFO, part of the role of your CEO. So I think that's another problem that happens in that definition as well. So, in your own career journey, do you feel you received more sponsorship and support from female executives or male executives?
So this part of the conversation, it really hurts me to say this, but I actually did receive more sponsorship from male executives. And I've thought about this a lot. I've pondered it. I've talked about it with other HR leaders. I've talked about it with other executives. And there is a pattern. There seems to be, when I think about my role, HR, I typically reported into women leaders. So as I grew up in my career, all the people that I reported into were women. And it was very difficult to try to gain experiences that were stretch goals or new experiences so that you could develop yourself. A lot of the grunt work, the admin, the really low level work was kind of kept at the generalist level. And all the high level work, the glory, I would say, was kept at the top. And so that female leader would hold it to herself. And I felt like it took years and years and years of trying to prove yourself. And it was so difficult. There wasn't a lot of sponsorship. It just kind of, for me, I felt like this was just the way it was, the industry. And I've often thought about, am I in the wrong industry? Am I in the wrong field? And as I started,
and it wasn't because you have held a lot of, from what I can see from your profile, you worked in tech organizations, which tend to be mostly male, but you're saying this was the case even when you reported into women executives.
Yeah, it's for a lot of my earlier years. And I'm not sure if it was because I worked in corporations, maybe it was a little bit more conservative. But as I started maturing into my roles and gaining more senior leadership roles, I eventually got to the point where I became the head of HR. And so I'm finally at the top, and I happen to be reporting to the CEO directly. And lo and behold, they happen to be males. And so my first time reporting into a male, I was really nervous. I had never had a male boss before. My whole life was female bosses, and I was a little bit uncomfortable. And it was the greatest experience that I had. Very open to giving me all types of risky roles, work that I had never done before, allowing my team to do the same. So it wasn't just directed at me, but also at my team, allowing you to make mistakes and learn and try to do different things, take risks. And it even sitting at the executive table, at the leadership table, and maybe I was the only female there and all the other leaders were predominantly male, being in a startup environment or a tech company, but being asked questions, having the opportunity to give input. And I had a moment where I thought, wow, it's not just this one CEO. I've worked now for multiple male bosses and they've given me so much support. And I think what that did was it really made me think about what can I do to change my own experience. I don't want to do the same thing. I heard this term recently called the sisterhood ceiling. And what it was there's not enough room for two women at the top. I'm going to have to make sure it's just me and no one else. And I thought, oh my God, that's a horrible way to think. I think there's tons of room at the top. I don't want to be the only female at the executive table. I never want to be that one person. And so I've taken a lot of, I pondered this a lot and really thought, you know what, I'm not going to be negative about it, but I realized that it's all about your management style. And so as a result, I think that I've changed the way I view what sponsorship can do, the power that you could have as a leader to give others a voice. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of women that apply to HR roles, and I don't want them to go through the same experiences that I've gone through. So I do try to give them as much opportunity as possible. Sometimes they say, wow, you're giving me work I've never done before. I'm a little bit uncomfortable and nervous, but I always say it's a good thing. You know, you're going to learn so much, and there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. It's not the end of the world. We're actually going to learn faster by doing that.
It's funny, in one of the roles that I had, we had this thing about how we took 10% of the role, and 10% of the role was risky. So what that meant is 90% of your projects had to be amazing. Meanwhile, 10% was like, just be creative, do what you can. and you're not going to be managed on results. And
I love that.
found some of the best stuff came out of that 10% because people suddenly didn't feel this need to think about, ROI and things of that kind. So you've talked about changing the scene for the next generation of leaders. So let's talk about that. How would you describe how you support, sponsor, or promote women based on the experiences that you've faced in your career? Like, how do you give me some detail? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I do select carefully because I get reached out by a lot of people asking for mentorship and sponsorship, and I wish I could help everyone. But what I try to do is try to give back my time. I'll spend about 20% of my time trying to help and mentor and support others that could use that opportunity. Maybe a woman mentor that they didn't have, just as I didn't have growing up. And what I really try to do is get them to not be afraid. Don't be afraid to try new things. Be creative. Even something as simple as don't just look for your next job. Try to find your next leader, your next boss, the ones that will support you, the ones that believe in you. I always believe that I've hired a lot of executives at companies, and the best executives, the best leaders actually have a following. They have people that will follow them from company to company because they're just so amazing as a leader and they give such great opportunities. So I do that. I try to give voices to people that often won't have that voice. I think that what I've heard often is, wow, you're at the head of HR, and I don't see that often as a woman of color. As an Asian minority. And when I see that you can do it, I feel like I can do it as well. So I do get a lot of outreach from people who want to see leaders that look like them, who believe that they can also reach the top. And so I do spend my time doing that, but I always encourage people to take that risk, find a mentor, find a leader that can share a lot of things with you that will help your career. Because if you just kind of stick around and you just hope you'll get there, it's going to take a really long time. What you really need is a lot of sponsorship. You need someone who can share their experiences and be an ally for you so that they can help you to get to where you want to go and not be afraid, to give you that confidence and that boost that you need.
It's interesting. I've always thought that HR leaders had sort of their hands on the tap. Right, and we're having all of these conversations about diversity, right? In what has been very difficult year, and I'm speaking specifically about the protests. And here is an opportunity through mentorship and sponsorship, I would think, to examine who you're supporting and say, how am I reflecting it? Not just in the people that I recommend for hires and all of that other stuff, but in the very people that you're mentoring, because if a person of color in a particular position could potentially influence these other hires if they're in a leadership role in HR, right? So that's interesting that I never thought of sort of the hand on that part of the tap. But we've spoken about you as a woman inspiring women leaders in HR. Talk to me about how you think men can help to reduce the biases that women leaders face.
Yeah, working in HR, I always find that we have our OKRs, and we always look at data numbers. And what I find the most common thing that companies want to do is we need to increase more women on the leadership team, and we need to bring on more women in engineering and tech. And so it's very much about numbers. We want to increase by 20%. We want to have this many more hires. That's great. But if you don't have the support networks internally, what you're going to see is also a fairly large number of people leaving that are also women. So I always say it's great that you get them in, but you've got to have the programs and the support to actually make them want to stay. And I think the greatest allies can be men, particularly men who have hiring power. So they will be the hiring managers, men that can make promotion or salary increase decisions, men that work in predominantly male-dominated departments like engineering. So, for example, I worked at a company where we really did want to bring more women into our engineering team, and the hiring managers were all men. And they came to me and asked me, like, what can I do? I know that we're creating this supportive environment, and I know we have some initiatives at the corporate level that we're working on, but what can I personally do? And I said, well, give me an example of, someone that you interviewed who was a woman, and what was that experience like? And they said, Oh, well, to be honest with you, when I interview women engineers, they always ask for a lesser salary than men. And I said, are they less qualified? And they said, no. In fact, some of these women have more experience than these men engineers. And I said, so what do you do then? And I wanted to see what that hiring manager would do. Would he actually give them a lower salary and say, yeah, I saved the company, 10% on the salary? I wanted to see what he would say. And he said, well, he goes, that really shocked me. And then it made me feel really sad. I thought about my daughter, and I thought when she's ready to start working, she's in high school right now. She wants to get into engineering and become someone in the tech field. He said, I don't want her to go through that. I want her to have, a fair playing field. And so it's these little conversations I find that can make the biggest difference, because what I said was pay her fairly. You know what you can offer, but pay her fairly based on the experience that she has, what she can bring to the table, and what the job entails. And regardless if she asked for a salary that was $15,000 less, that doesn't mean that you need to offer that to her. And it was at that moment where he looked at me and said, you mean we can do that? And I said, you absolutely can. You're the hiring manager. It's coming out of your department, and you can create the change that you want to see. And so I always say to men, don't create jobs for women or men. Just create great jobs and, hire great people, do the right thing. I know that was just one example, but it's being really conscious of making decisions. Like as a leader, you have the power and authority to make a lot of decisions, and you're going to affect your department and how you build out a company culture. And so I say, be really thoughtful and conscious about how you make your decisions, even at the minutiae details, because all of that will affect the culture of the organization. You build it, you create it.
It's interesting that I also think that, the reason you probably want to be a little bit cautious about things like pay too, is that eventually, months down the road, over a beer or over coffee, there's going to be a discussion. People are going to find out what they're paid. And then what do you have on your hands? You spent all this money bringing this brain in, and there they go, right? It's
Absolutely.
interesting. I actually came across a company, I think they're based out of the UK, that publicizes their entire salary. I can't think of what it is right now, but it was sort of this big story that was going around. But having said that, we do have questions. I'm going to shoot them to you. So this is a question from Larry. So, you've talked about these stereotypes. What are we doing as HR to change these stereotypical mindsets of people in the organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, I see right now, particularly right now with, Black Lives Matter that's happening, all the protests, I see that a lot of companies are focusing on their diversity and inclusion initiatives. And so I've seen a lot of HR leaders asking what are the best programs we could incorporate into our company. That's great. I think that that's a first step. I think it's also having real conversations. So I always encourage, within an organization, you need to be very transparent and talk about the difficult things. If your organization is predominantly like male dominant and you kind of have like a bro culture, you've got to talk about the difficult things that are hard to talk about so that you can actually implement those changes. And until you can do that, it's just, surface level. It makes us look good. You're saying all the right things, but you're not actually dealing with the difficult topics. And it's just like talking about, discrimination. It's a messy topic. It's very sensitive and emotional, but you got to talk about it. It exists. There's a lot of issues I find in HR that you've got to have. You got to have those difficult conversations and open up the discussions, because if you can't do that, then, you're just creating a culture of, we look good, we look politically correct, but deep down inside, you've got deeper issues going on.
And, as a journalist, I'll just say that what is once in a private forum, eventually, sometimes gets out into the public forum. So you want to deal with that laundry, it might be a good time to sort of get together. And at the end of the day, it might even be a good policy long-term for your organization.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. And I think I don't see any other questions. I'm going to make sure that I don't miss any, because we missed a question from Laura for Naomi with ghosting. And Laura, we're going to try to find a way to get Naomi to answer that question for you. But I think that's it for questions. So thank you, Christine. Oh, wait. No, we do have another question. See, it always comes in at the last. This is when people get inspired. Please do keep sending them in. So Danielle Alexandria says, oh, great interview so far, a compliment. It says, I'm wondering if you could share any additional unconscious biases.
Yeah, from my experiences, it's so subtle, but it's an unconscious bias. It's almost like when you look at leaders and you think, a really strong leader is someone who's confident. It's the outspoken ones. They're the ones that aren't afraid to take risk and they speak up in meetings. But I always used to say, being the loudest person in the room doesn't make you the smartest person in the room. You're not actually have the best ideas. It's just you happen to be the loudest. And I always say, you've got to find opportunities to allow everyone to speak. Give them the opportunity to share what they're thinking, because sometimes that's that quiet person that's sitting in the room that's very thoughtful and isn't as impulsive. They come out with more thoughtful solutions. And maybe it takes them, a few more minutes to kind of get their thoughts together. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think we have these assumptions that leaders have to be risky and bold and unafraid. And it's an unconscious bias that is much more favorable to men, because they see men as like leaders that are unafraid. It's that whole risk thing again. But I've seen amazing women that are very thoughtful and a little bit more quiet or subdued, because they're really thinking about what they want to say and thinking about all the repercussions. It takes a lot of thought to kind of put ideas together at a leadership level and share it with the team. So I think that's something that's always stood out for me.
Great. And we do have 2 more questions, and I'd love to take both of them on. So when searching for a job, and this is from Laura Salt, when searching for a job, what are some of the indicators that a hiring manager will be a great mentor or sponsor?
Great question. I've always found that the best hiring managers who end up being great mentors and sponsors are the ones that truly care about people. They actually have a voice. When I ask them, how did the interview go? They're not just talking about the hard skills that a person can bring to the role. Sometimes they're looking at the potential. Sometimes they're looking at something much more deeper. And I always find the much more experienced hiring managers can probe. They can see things within people that aren't so obvious and aren't always necessarily on their resume. It might be an example of someone who's just landed in Canada, has come from overseas, and they're not necessarily looking for Canadian experience. They're actually saying, you know what, this person came from, let's say it's Brazil, and it looks like they worked at a company that was very similar to ours. It's been in the same type of industry. It would be like a Brazilian kind of Uber. So it's like they can see the opportunities and the potential within people without letting those unconscious biases stand in the way. So I think it's always people that genuinely can believe in the best in people and can go beyond just what they see on paper and dig through a little bit more.
Fantastic. I will make time for one last question. So this is from Larry. So how do you create that right corporate culture?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer, because I have a lot of CEOs and founders that ask the same question. And I always say, when I think about it, it comes straight from the top. You can't have HR go out there and, hey, just create a very diverse culture for me, okay? You do your thing and we're going to run the business. It doesn't work that way. HR is the business, people are the business. And so that strategy has to come straight from the top. And a true CEO and all the executive leaders have to care. Every single person at the executive table has to care. If there's one person at the executive table that doesn't care, that department is in trouble. So I always say it has to be a strategy. It can't just be a HR culture thing. It is a strategy within the culture, and it has to start right from the top. And the CEO and all the executives at the table who are sitting there getting their big paychecks, they have to be the ones that sponsor and align with people and create these programs and ensure that they hold people accountable. Because if there's someone on the team who could be a genius but is a complete jerk and maybe doesn't like working with women because they believe that engineering is for men, you've got to hold that person accountable, or you're condoning that behavior.
Amazing. Insightful as always. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
I'm going to end this session now, and do stay on. Grab a glass of water if you have to, and I'm going to start the next session, which is our third speaker. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.